Welcome to Soul Thrive, where we explore spirituality through healing trauma, shadow work, and applying the laws of the universe in order to master ourselves without the fear of the unknown.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Soul Tribe podcast. And today we are joined by Katherine, who is an author, a devoted mom, and a world traveler. And her memoir, Calling It Off, Memoir of an Almost Bride, is a powerful invitation to trust your intuition, break free from perfectionism. This is for me, and find courage in life's crossroads. Catherine's story begins with calling off her wedding, a decision that could have shattered her, but instead became the spark that reshaped her life. Let's dive in.
Ooh, this
Welcome.
one is interesting. I'm excited to get into this conversation. Welcome, Catherine. Thank you so much for coming on to our podcast. I mean, what happened?
Yeah, I
Tell
want to
us
start
our
with that.
story. Like, I know that's like, I mean, let's talk about it.
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, it was a big life moment. It was a huge decision, the one of the most difficult but best decisions I've ever made. And like you said, it really changed the trajectory of my life and how I embraced who I am and helped shape me as a person and now as a mom. So it's quite an interesting tale.
All right. So I want to know what got you to that point. I mean, like, here you are, you're with someone, you love them, you agree to marry them.
How does it
You're,
start? Like,
yeah,
what do
like,
you, is it
yeah, it's,
feelings?
I
Is
mean,
it
like, you're
thoughts?
thinking through just that whole process. I mean, like, I got engaged, I got married, I'm with my husband, I love him. I mean, some days he drives me nuts. However, at the end of the day, it's like when you say yes to someone, you assume like this is your life partner. That's not to say everyone's on that journey. People get divorced all the time. But what was that moment for you to be like, no, this is just not intuitively right for me? What was that nudge for you?
Well, it started in some small nudges that I didn't listen to. So
Right.
even the day we got engaged, it just felt off. It was a beautiful, perfect proposal. It was a person I loved. And we had, some toxic red flags in our relationship, but I kind of ignored them to keep moving forward, to keep moving the relationship forward. And so even in the beginning, there were just these subtle doubts that were whispering through my brain, and I purposely ignored them. I quieted them. I thought the wedding and the marriage was, the goal rather
Right.
than a really solid foundation of a relationship. And over time, I mean, it took me 11 and a half months from the day I said yes to the time I ultimately got the courage and really acknowledged that deep knowing before I ultimately decided to call it off 2 weeks before the wedding was supposed to take place. So
Right.
it was a long journey to get to that moment. But when I finally did, it was just this heaviness and this weight of this knowing. And I talk about it in the book, but literally trying my wedding dress for the last time, looking in the mirror and seeing someone who wasn't me, seeing a
Mm-hmm.
life that wasn't mine, seeing even a dress that was
Mm-hmm.
so not reflective of who I was and wanted to be, and just felt incredibly inauthentic. And so in that moment, I decided I cannot get married. This is not my path. And then I had to get the courage to unravel it all.
I have
Okay, you go and then I'll go.
here's the thing. I want people to kind of understand like you were in it and it's that fairy tale, right? It's that
Mhm.
I'm willing to bypass those red flags. I'm willing to maybe even self-abandon in certain moments because of that bigger picture.
Mhm.
What were some of the self-abandoning aspects or red flags that you were not willing to in the moment throughout that experience kind of navigate through or understand up until it got obviously it amped up, right? Because that's what happens. Eventually, it gets to a certain point where you're like,
Mhm.
I can't do this anymore because it accumulates over time. So, what were do you think some of the ways that you self abandoned, and what were some of these red flags that you were not paying attention to because of the bigger picture, right? Because of that idea of that beautiful bride walking down the aisle, looking at that, what you're supposed to traditionally do.
I think the what you're supposed to do was a very big piece of the push in this relationship. I was 32 at the time. I knew I wanted a family. I wanted all those things. And so this felt like what I was supposed to do, even if I knew, again, abandoned my own belief that this was the wrong relationship. We were not aligned in our values. We had an inability to communicate in a
Mm-hmm.
healthy way, an obvious inability to communicate in that way. I was showing up not as my best version of self. I was self medicating with alcohol. I was picking fights too. I mean, it was not a beautiful, wonderfully kind way for me to show up either.
Mm-hmm.
And we brought out the worst in each other. I mean, you want your partner ideally to help you grow and evolve into the best version of you. And this was making me almost the worst version of me. And so I abandoned my own desire to be my best self in service of this goal. I mean, red flags were also things as small as, you know, being more curious, loving other cultures, wanting to travel, to how we wanted to raise our family and how we
Mm-hmm.
wanted to structure our home life. I mean, it ran the spectrum. And again, I ignored all of those in service of this goal.
One of the questions I have is because we know that the body kind of keeps the score,
Mm,
right? So, kind of a follow-up to your question,
Mm-hmm.
did did your body have any signs? Did you have anxiety? Did you have any other like physical ailments? Because usually when we push against ourselves for so long, something starts to give, especially like your body will tell you where you're at, right?
absolutely, yes. Uh, so much showed up in my body. I'm prone to headaches in stressful times, but I would have headaches for 2 weeks at a time. That would
Mm-hmm.
never, ever go away. I stopped being able to sleep, especially as things amped up before I made my choice. I wasn't able to sleep. I had horrible anxiety, which, I think I can struggle with anyway,
Mm-hmm.
but it became ever present. I felt this shrinking, contracting, heavy feeling throughout the entirety of my body. And as a lifelong athlete, I knew what that meant and still kept ignoring it. And interestingly, when I made the decision, not even when I had the conversation, but when I made the decision, there was a weight that lifted. There was an ability to sleep instantly that night, even though I knew the difficult road ahead. My body relaxed in an easeful way. uh, let me know I was doing the right thing.
I want to ask you, like, how did you communicate this to anyone else about your doubts? Did you communicate it to people around you? What was the response? Because usually sometimes people would be like, you just have cold feet, right? So don't worry, like this is normal. It's normal for you to feel this way. It's normal for your body to react this way. I think we all think it's
Tell
normal
ourselves. Yeah.
without actually realizing that maybe that in itself could be a
Hmm.
big no-no. So what was the dialogue that was going on around you when it came to, your insecurities about what was going on, what you were feeling and what you were thinking, and then 2 weeks before, I don't think this is my person.
So I told myself for a very long time it was probably cold feet. I didn't talk too much about it early on because I really, at that point, thought this person might still be my partner. And I didn't
Hmm.
want to speak ill of somebody that I loved because your friends and your family remember the negatives. And so I really sometimes think I try to be careful with what I share in the heat of the moment that maybe I won't feel the same way a week from then, but they'll remember forever.
Lessons that
Um,
I have to learn.
it's hard. And sometimes you want to, and I think you should. It's
Hmm.
up to each person. I waited until we got closer, and then some little small confessions would escape of not being overtly happy when talking about the wedding. People would notice that. People would notice, when I would say, "Yeah, I guess I'm excited," and just couldn't really authentically buy into it. Your friends know you. They know when genuine excitement
Hmm.
exists there. And then ultimately, I had a therapist who I finally came clean to a few months before, and really, for the first time, said, "I'm having serious doubts that feel bigger." Um, than your average doubt.
Hmm.
And so that was a really important place for me to be able to openly explore that without judgment, without fear of judgment, and also without having to make a commitment. I needed to talk it through and realize it was a possibility to walk away and kind of try that on. without commitment before I ever got to the place of, firmly committing to that decision.
Mm-hmm.
And when you made that decision, what feelings kind of like showed up? Was there any like guilt or shame or anything along those lines, or self-questioning or self-doubt? Because it's one thing to think about it and the other to actually execute it 2 weeks before. Because now we're talking about like letting people know, hey, remember that invitation? Not
The
happening.
deposits, the money,
Yeah, like
the
everything.
future mother-in-law's perspective,
His feelings,
his feelings. Like that's
yeah,
a lot to think about, right?
yeah.
Compounded.
It's overwhelming, honestly. It was so much. And the shame and the guilt around portraying this false facade,
Mhm.
around the time, money, and energy and love that our family and friends had invested, not only in the wedding, but in our multiple year relationship. I
Right.
mean, you feel like a fraud, or I felt a little like a fraud. And that guilt was really overwhelming. And I had so much shame around that waste. And that is part of why I stayed for as long as I did.
Right.
By the time I
That
got to
makes
the
sense.
point to make the choice, I had already decided that the shame and the guilt wasn't worth my unhappiness. So by the time I made the choice, the shame and the guilt, obviously I was heartbroken and embarrassed. Like it was embarrassing to call everybody. And it was a worthwhile obstacle to overcome to stay true to myself. So by then, I had removed the shame and the guilt, and it is the only thing that allowed me to move forward.
Hmm.
Hmm. And I know that like in the book you talk about sort of letting go of that quote unquote perfect life. Was this the start of that? As someone who's been working on her perfectionism for some time, I don't know, I'm gonna maybe make a wild guess that maybe that's something that you've also dealt with. So I'm curious about your journey to, because it's hard when you're a perfectionist. Like there's OCD, there's a certain um it's not even about like image, it's the way that you operate. It's just
Hmm.
innate. Like you don't know any other
Your
way.
adaptation for sure.
and
Yep.
and to let go of that, it's like letting go of like a big part of yourself.
Yes, I am the oldest of four. I'm type A. I am very much a perfectionist. I viewed this wedding as an achievement, as a
Hmm.
success, as like finally meeting that benchmark and essentially acknowledging and choosing to fail, right? Like I chose to fail in reaching that perfect was really difficult. And I I came out the other side. Like it was evidence to myself that I had fallen, quote unquote, fallen short of perfect. And I came out
Mhm.
happier on the other side. So now I can kind of look back at it and say, what a beautiful moment in that regard, because it opened the door and helped remove just a little bit of that pressure and helped remove the comparison. Right. So I could no longer compare myself to my friends who were already married with babies or to people on Instagram or to societal expectations because I had literally just thrown them out the window.
Right.
So
Mhm.
I had to stop that comparison and embrace the imperfection. Otherwise, I would have gotten married. So,
Right. It goes back to the conversation that you and I have been having in the last little while. Again, this idea of death and rebirth, right? So
Mhm.
it's like losing the identity, losing the perspective of who you think you are operating as, the coping mechanisms, and really kind of being like, okay, if I take a leap of faith and not self-abandon, who will I become? Where will I go? What will meet me on the other end of all of
Mhm.
this? Which is it's so, so scary. People, I get it. Like to make a decision like that and to disappoint so many people versus disappointing yourself, which is crazy because so many people do it. We do it far
mhm.
more than we realize. We
Mhm.
put ourselves in these predicaments where we would much rather disappoint ourselves than to disappoint the people around us. So that takes bravery. What you're communicating right now was very brave of you because you didn't know what was going to be on the other end of that. So what is your life looking like now on the other end of this?
Immediately after, it was a disaster.
Right.
But
Usually is the death of the soul. It's like, oh my God, everything
oh,
sucks.
it was a disaster. I was a disaster. And that disaster was far more short-lived than I thought it would be.
Hmm.
I very quickly was able to come back and focus on myself. For the first time, and I think maybe ever, I started focusing on my relationship to me rather than as a daughter, as a partner, as a sister. I really got to focus on rebuilding exactly what I wanted.
Hmm.
I don't know that we get a lot of opportunities like that in life. And this felt like a totally clean slate. Like I burned my life up.
Right.
So with the clean slate, I got to start over. And pretty rapidly, I really regained that self-confidence, that self-love. I started to take care of myself, prioritize myself, and pretty quickly was able to call in the most magical relationship that ended up being far more aligned, my person and my now husband and the
Hmm.
father to my daughter. I met him 5 months after I was supposed to get married.
Right.
And, dated for many years before a wedding. But then I got to plan a wedding that felt completely true and authentic to me and focus on our relationship at the core of it rather than a big production. So life
If
now is
yeah.
pretty stunning.
It feels like what we don't register that we do when we're prioritizing everybody else but ourselves. It's like you could be settling into something when just around the corner, that better experience is waiting for you. And
Mhm.
I wish more people were brave enough to kind of look and examine their life and their experiences to give themselves the opportunity to be like, you know what? I'm not happy. So what do I need to change here? What's that going to look like? How can I choose me? And like I said, this is a very brave thing that you did because you're young, right? It's falling into perfectionism. There's
Mhm.
comparison no matter
Mhm.
what. Breaking that cycle is huge because like when we're talking about comparison, we're talking about trauma at the end
Mhm.
of the day, right? You grew up with siblings, so there's four of you, like you were saying. So it's always like, what's the next person doing? What's the next person doing? Well, how are they accomplishing? So on and so forth. So it's a lot to kind of consider, but I really do think it's such a beautiful thing at times. I mean, I also look at it on the other spectrum too. Like, imagine if you had gone through the actual wedding and then ended up divorced.
But you'd still have to go through the same
A
process.
hundred
Just
percent, just
Yep.
later,
more.
just later, and that's a
Yeah.
lot of people's story,
Yeah.
right? They still go with the decision, and then they're so out of alignment that it still ends up exactly where it was supposed to go, which
Mhm.
is like an interesting thing, no matter what. In some ways, we're always being supported.
And I also think it's really important to point out that it wasn't meant for me, but it also wasn't meant for him.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, he was released to the opportunity to find his person,
Yes.
and he did, right? Like we have both ended up in far happier, healthier places
Mm-hmm.
and happier, healthier people. So it wasn't just, breaking the mold for me, but ultimately I think it really was intended to be an act of love to him as well.
Mm-hmm. Feels like a great lesson in your life. It's like when people come into our lives, they're going to teach us things, right? They're going to help us grow and help us evolve. And he did. He helped you become the best version of yourself, even though being in it was so destructive at that time. And then it's like being in that destruction made you choose you, which
Well,
is
it was the
beautiful.
catalyst to try.
Yeah.
I love this
Mhm.
conversation because for my Virgo brain, this gives a tangible,
Yes.
tangible example of because like, come on, so many people talk about choosing. You got to choose
Hmm.
yourself. You got to
Hmm.
choose yourself.
Hmm.
Mhm.
What does that mean? It's like it's so up here, right? But this is an example of like what choosing yourself looks like. And almost always it involves letting somebody else down. And
Hmm.
for me, it just makes me wonder, okay, as I navigate my life and I want to continue to choose myself, even in like the smallest everyday moments, I know that by default I go, how's that person gonna feel?
Right. And it
Mhm.
goes back into sometimes it's great to consider and be considerate and have empathy towards other people's experiences. But I think choosing you really comes with a lot of self-love and empathy. And it's also, like you said, back to your point and perspective, that it helped that other person find love too.
Hmm.
It helped them in the long run. So by choosing you, you're also helping other people in the process as well through your journey, through your story, and through their own lesson in it as well, which is beautiful.
I completely agree.
And I'm curious, has this experience also made other decision making easier? Like when you find yourself at a crossroads, you kind of like now know, okay, now I can listen to myself. I can recognize the same signs and patterns. I can listen to my body. Like, oh, this feels like the way it did when I was in that previous relationship and I didn't want to get married. Like, did that also propel you into this space where you were even more sure of what you wanted, and sort of made those choices easier down the road?
Yeah, so this was a really big choice to make. And I came through and I trusted myself through the process and I saw the beauty on the other side. And it has made the smaller choices so much easier. Like my no has gotten really powerful in a very kind but very firm way. I recognize those boundaries and I'm able to make those choices from a true place of knowing. And it showed me my own patterns. So I think everybody's patterns are a little bit different. And for me, there's kind of three pieces that I mentally went through when I was making this decision. And I still go back to those three pieces. And part of it is how I feel in my body, that somatic experience and recognizing the triggers and recognizing the patterns. Part of it is acknowledging the fears and the shame and the guilt and our understanding what is holding me in place, like what's holding me in a place of indecision and maybe feeling trapped. And a third piece is really mentally rehearsing that decision making process and trying it on and seeing how it goes. And so between those three, and it's something I talk a lot about, and it's, I have a resource on my website for it as well. But between those three pillars, that has helped me come back in an intentional way. So if it is a difficult decision, I can revert back to the tools that I learned through this process, and it makes most of my decisions far easier.
Mm-hmm.
And did you ever think about, okay, where is this coming from? Like, is this coming from certain aspects of my childhood, some trauma, some experiences I've been through? Because it was ultimately, I guess it started out as a pattern of self-abandonment or not listening to yourself, not listening to your gut, your truth, all of that. Did you ever like reflect on that and where it could have possibly come from?
I didn't in that episode of life. I don't think I had the capacity for it, but with time, absolutely. I've reflected back to try to understand what happened, how did we get here, and also pull that lesson out. That reflection's part of what I tried to put into the book. And yeah, it started from a lifetime of people pleasing, and wanting stability and craving love and relationship in this beautiful home life. Parents divorced when I was little, like many. So I saw that structure crumble from a very early age. And instead of being turned off by it, I absolutely craved it. Like that was what I wanted, and what I sought kind of at all costs.
Hmm.
What made you decide to write a book?
I wanted the conversation and the resource that I didn't have when I was going through it.
Mm-hmm.
I Googled everything when I was in my decision making process. And I found an article on the knot, which is like very pro wedding, which was
Hmm.
kind of interesting. There are a lot of Reddit threads, but I wanted an open, vulnerable conversation. I didn't realize how common it is. Roughly 1 in 5 engagements don't end in a wedding, and yet
Mm-hmm.
there wasn't a conversation that I could find. And so I decided to be the vulnerable perspective and just share my story very openly in the hopes that somebody else felt seen where I didn't.
Hmm. Yeah, I think often it's probably not discussed because there's so much shame, like we
Hmm.
talked about, tied to it. And so they just want to like bury it and pretend that it doesn't exist. And I love that you actually have brought this to light and have exposed this in such a beautiful way and such a respectful way too, where you're not just talking about the other person and the blame of the other person. And I've like, this like I penning against individuals. It's like a massive accountability on your part of even just registering, your own trauma that was put on into this relationship and highlighting all these aspects of yourself. So it's just a beautiful way of kind of unraveling such a true human experience. And I would hope that more people would be brave enough to kind of lean into that intuition, lean into that sensory awareness of like, this doesn't feel good. So can I choose something differently? You have
Yeah.
anything else you want
Maybe as
to
to end. So for those who are
Yeah.
standing maybe at their own crossroads and they're feeling unsure or scared or maybe even like heartbroken, what would you say to help them trust themselves to take that next step?
I would say ultimately, the only person that knows our truth is us. And so to really check in, listen for that, feel into it, and have the bravery to own it and step through it, because ultimately those that love you will meet you with grace. And I think it's really important that we are proud of the choices we make and the person that we are. And yes, that grace is beautiful, but true happiness comes from being confident in the life that we're building and the life that we're living, and remaining devoted to achieving that higher vision that we have for ourselves. So keep that devotion and just trust your gut and go with it.
I love that. Trust your gut, guys, please. I always say that. I'm like, guys, come on, please listen to your intuition. It's so, so important. Katherine, I wanted to say thank you so much for coming on to our podcast. We are going to link everything so people can purchase your book. Yeah, guys, thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you so much.